Ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome to the Civic Leadership Institute second virtual session. Assisting us today with any technical questions are our Director of Programming, Amasa Smith, and Megan Shuford, our Program Associate for the Civic Scholars Program. My name is Sarah Jane Kirkland and I am the President and CEO for the Civic Leadership Institute. It is my privilege to welcome you all. We have had more than 100 people register for this virtual session this morning, and we're very excited to have you here with us. Now, before we get started, I wanted to share with you that today is a very important day. Of course, we all know that it is Cinco de Mayo, but it is also Giving Tuesday now, a global day of giving and unity as an emergency response to the unprecedented need caused by COVID-19. So today, I would ask you to think about how you can give back. Perhaps it's donating supplies to support healthcare workers. Maybe you can help combat loneliness by reaching to a neighbor, seniors, or veterans. Perhaps you can help out small businesses by buying gift cards or consider giving to organizations you love the most. No amount is too little, and many nonprofits are on the front line providing essential services for our community. I hope you will join me. We can all find ways, big and small, to make an impact. Now, I think you'll agree with me, today's topic is of the utmost relevance. How do we restart our economy? What are some of the very real impacts our business community will feel from this pandemic? If we had a time machine, what would our business climate look like in 6 months, 12 months, 2 years? These are real questions that require thoughtful dialogue and community input. Many of you have recently taken part in a region-wide business survey to elicit much of that input. Make no mistake, this has truly been an innovative approach and a great example of how community and stakeholders can come together. The survey sponsors include the Alliance, formerly HREDA, Reinvent Hampton Roads, the Hampton Roads Chamber, the Virginia Peninsula Chamber, the Hampton Roads Workforce Council, the Greater Peninsula Workforce Board, and the Old Dominion University Strome College of Business. Ladies and gentlemen, that is an impressive collection of talent and resources. Today, we're delighted to have two of the architects of the survey and the forum with us. Doug Smith joined the Hampton Roads Economic Development Alliance as President and CEO in September of 2019. He leads the operation of the region's economic development organization that represents 11 municipalities and over 50 private sector investors. Doug has a tremendous public and private experience. He was appointed City Manager of Norfolk in 2017 and has served as the Deputy City Manager for Virginia Beach and Portsmouth. Doug was elected to the Portsmouth City Council in 2006, where he served for 4 years. In the private sector, Doug served as President and CEO of Kaufman & Knowles. That is a very impressive resume. John Martin is no stranger to our region either, and we're so lucky to have John with us today. After almost 20 years in the advertising business, John took the helm of the Southeastern Institute of Research. In the years since, John has built SIR into the most well-respected research and consulting firm in the Commonwealth. John was instrumental in shepherding the business survey and galvanizing its stakeholders to maximize their full collective resources. So before we begin, just a few tips on engagement. Our session will last approximately 1 hour, and as you consider questions, please submit them by using the question function on your screen. I'll relay the questions to our panelists as we go along. And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is my privilege to introduce our first panelist of the morning, Doug Smith. The floor is yours, sir.
Sarah Jane, good morning. Good morning, everyone. I would like to clear up one piece. We had a pre-call a few minutes ago, and there was some chatter apparently about the class of 2020 and already trying to lay claim to the best class of civic ever. And just so we sort of clarify that up front, the undisputed best class was the class of 2001. And so you see Sarah Jane nodding. She's in complete agreement, so I appreciate that.
Yeah, wow.
So listen, I'm going to ask Amesa to pop to the next slide. And what John and I are going to talk to you about, I'm going to take a little bit of sort of presenter's privilege and tell you a bit about the new alliance. And I think it's relevant because it really started to lay the groundwork for the collaboration that has taken place over the last 6 weeks or more. And I'll touch a little bit about the momentum that, frankly, we had going into this crisis and how we're building on that momentum through the crisis. And I'll talk to you a little bit about what that has looked like, a call that we had with Senator Warner that really teed up the tool that John's going to talk to you about, the business survey, and then talk you through what I think is maybe the most relevant stuff, which is what are we doing going forward, and how are we going to face this, and what will our next steps be. And there is plenty of opportunity for folks on this call to plug in, and so I would challenge you to do that in a variety of ways. And obviously then we're happy to answer questions after that's done. So Mesa, if you'll pop the next slide up. I think it's important that our organization, Sarah Jane described it really well, but for our region, we chased an old economic development model for a long time. It's this model on the left, and it was where our regional organization was only focused on bringing investment in from out of the region. And all the things that you see on the right were what the other regional groups really across the country had started doing many, many years ago. And economic development is about so much more than attraction, and the things that, certainly the entrepreneurship, which I think we've done as a region, we've really improved that piece with Monique Adams and others really driving some really interesting things going on there. Nancy Gurdon from Old Dominion. You'll see our approach has really started to focus on clusters and target industries. We've had to put the infrastructure in place to support that. And maybe most importantly for our organization is a shift to focusing on business expansion and business retention, because that's where your growth really comes from. And that's really helped position us as we've come into this crisis to hopefully be, to play an important role in the recovery. Next slide, please. So if you look at who we are, the new model is really, it's a partnership with the local economic development groups. We have been largely a publicly funded organization up until really the last 6 months. And W. and Harry Lester in particular, Jim Spohr and others really drove a significant private sector campaign to where we now have more private investment than public investment. And that allows us to have a budget of about $4 million a year. The other big change was a master agreement with the 11 jurisdictions that are part of the alliance. So the Greater Williamsburg has their own alliance. We'll talk about that in a second. But those 11 jurisdictions have been clear on what our role is and what the funding stream is. And that's taken it's given us a lot of certainty and clarity. Obviously, new president's been hired. But I'm going to talk real quick about the new board. When we were a 70-person board for a period of time, got it down to 30. We're now down to 13. And you can imagine that's a much more streamlined process. But again, the scope of work includes business retention and expansion. We didn't understand our product, our inventory of sites. We couldn't tell you how many 25-acre sites we had. And today, we can tell you very clearly. First, we started with 100-acre sites. And what it takes to get those sites into the stream of commerce. And now we know every 25-acre site that is available in Hampton Roads and what it takes to get that property in the stream of commerce. That's been driven by a very effective research group that Steve Harrison drives for us, working with Keith Kennedy over at the Planning District Commission. And he has what we now call business intelligence that's driving a big piece of that. And we talk a lot about partnerships, our partnerships with the Port Authority, the Virginia Economic Development Partnership, but most importantly is our RED team, the Regional Economic Development Team, which is all of the directors and the utilities, Virginia Natural Gas, Dominion, Cox, and as well as our regional partners like Reinvent Hampton Roads and the Hampton Roads Planning District Commission. So we really have a joint effort now to market this region. Next slide, please. This is relevant. The way we're managing our process is much more collaborative, but it's also pulling in private sector expertise. So and I don't expect you to see the bottom of this, but it will become relevant toward the end. We've put together committees around all of our target industries, as well as sites and facilities and economic impact. And again, we've got public and private folks at the table trying to push these initiatives forward. Next slide. And so for us, pre-COVID, our goal was to get this region in the top 15 of the 39 MSAs that have 1 to 3 million people. Before all this started, we ranked 35th out of 39 for job growth, 36th for wage growth, and 37th for gross domestic product. So clearly, we weren't where we needed to be. Our goal is, and we have a very clear plan of the job numbers pre-COVID that it would take to get there. Our goal is to be the most admired and desired economic development organization in the region. We want to be the place where folks want to come work. And this gets relevant to our situation now. We want to be the most connected business region in the Commonwealth. And interestingly, this COVID situation, which has forced us all, many of us home, has really forced us to use some new tools that I'll talk about that in some ways have actually connected us better and more efficiently. And then we really have a chance to be the offshore wind hub, supply chain hub of the East Coast. And I'm going to talk to you about another opportunity that's come our way as we wrap up to really jumpstart that. Next slide, please. So if you boil the Alliance down, we're really about three things. We're really about regional leadership and collaboration. We're about business retention and expansion, and that original bucket of attracting investment in from out of the market. And we do it in conjunction with these 11 jurisdictions, with our regional partners, and with the state and the Commonwealth. Next slide, please. So if you look at, don't expect you to be able to see this very clearly, but if you look at the right side of this equation, what I really want you to know is there is a regional economic development strategy in Hampton Roads, and arguably for the first time. And the right hand is really driven by reInvent and the Business Roundtable and others, that is very much about strategy and the long view. The left side is our organization and the day-to-day tactical implementation side. So as things evolve on the right side to where it's time for action, they will slide over to the Alliance. Next slide, please. So, it's interesting. We've launched, we've been really involved in 757 and the rebranding of the region, if you will. And we have 757 Proud is a fun Facebook and Instagram page we have. And we asked the question recently of kind of, what do you think about regional collaboration? Do we do it well? Do we not? And we got clobbered. And a lot of people, and a lot of it goes back to light rail in Virginia Beach. Oh, we didn't do light rail. And it was certainly in my mind, a missed opportunity. But that was 2016. And the reality is we've launched a $5 billion transportation program. We've got $700 million of on and off terminal improvements at the port, the dredging project. I know y'all have talked about the digital ring, this Eastern Virginia Regional Industrial Facilities Authority, the RIFA, which allows localities to invest in other communities and share revenues. The branding initiative I mentioned, the Tom Franz and others, and John's really involved in this with the mega region and the RVA 757 connects. And then maybe a more specific result is the recent Amazon announcements of the two massive facilities in Chesapeake and Suffolk required significant collaboration among those communities. That Suffolk project would not have been as appealing to Amazon if Chesapeake hadn't improved Portsmouth Boulevard. The Chesapeake project, frankly, couldn't happen without Norfolk and Norfolk City Council allowing that project to be developed adjacent to their main water line and to cross that main water line. And the Norfolk City Council got comfortable with the development there and voted to allow that to happen. Well, that was a fantastic action. Next slide. So where does that sort of launch us as COVID comes in? Y'all have heard me say this, if you've heard me speak, the narrative that this region doesn't collaborate, it just isn't true anymore. And we've got these amazing assets and potential. And this model of collaboration that's been embedded in our organization, and I'm going to talk about all these other organizations that have done it as well, is frankly what was needed, and it's already starting to work for us. And we're building on that momentum to get us out of this crisis and onto a path of recovery and resilience. Next slide, please. So who is that? And Sarah Jane mentioned it. Every other day, Brian Stevens from the Chamber, Jim Spohr from reInvent, Sean Avery at the Workforce Council, his peer Bill Mann over on the Peninsula, Jeff Tanner at Old Dominion, Bob McKenna at the Peninsula Chamber, and now the business school at William & Mary is coming in. We're on the phone every other day talking about this crisis and what we're doing and making sure that we are not tripping over one another, that we're reinforcing what each other's doing, and that we're building on the things that they're doing. And we've had a series of regional calls with our elected leaders. That started with a call with Senator Warner. Happened to be the Friday after the Senate passed the CARES Act. And Senator Warner got on the call with 70 business leaders, from Jennifer Boykin at the shipyard to Howard Kern at the Centera, to Bruce Thompson, to Johnny Lawson, you name it. We had some real players in the region. And what you heard was a lot of anecdotal stories. I've heard this about this company or this about that company, but not a lot of data. And you heard a lot of people saying, I need answers to questions. I'm overwhelmed by the information that's flowing my way. And so what came out of that sort of realization was this idea that we needed to survey the business community, and we needed real data. And Senator Warner's staff candidly helped us shape that initial survey and those questions so that the data would be relevant for them as they prepared for the next round of relief. The other thing, and I'll talk about, John's going to talk to you about the survey in some detail right now. Really, we've done 2 surveys. And then I'll come back and I'm going to talk to you about what we've done with this data. Among those things is developing a website and a forum at 757recovery.com. And I'd really urge you to, A, visit there, but B, launch a profile. I'll get in there, and it's a great way to get information, get clarity on topics, but also share. If you're an expert, we want you to share some information, and I'll touch on that when I come back. Next slide, please. So the survey that John's going to talk you through just finished wave 2, and the results are about to publish on 757recovery.com. But I'm going to ask John to take over and talk you through sort of the logic behind the survey, the processes, and the results.
Great. Thanks, Doug. Well, it's a pleasure to be on and to share a little bit of my favorite topic, research, and I'm looking forward to Doug's explanation of how we put this to use. So let's start with the next slide. So every great survey project starts with objectives, and the objectives that we have for this one, the first one, and now the second wave, is really to assess the impact on the business community and what business leaders are thinking in terms of the help that they need and what our community needs. So that was just job 1. And to identify for business leaders, what other actions are being taken by peer companies, so you can get a sense of how you're responding vis-a-vis others in the community. And then, as Doug mentioned, we wanted to get information gathered that we could pass on to our national delegation to help inform the future legislation that's going to send aid our way. So we also, I guess, lastly, wanted to set up benchmark scores so we could measure over time how we're performing in this COVID crisis. So let's go to the next slide. We put this project team together, which is very much all of those logos you just saw, the leading business organizations in the community. And it's been just a seamless team. I can't tell you how privileged I've been to be able to work with folks all committed to the success of the region. We put together a survey instrument that's about 10 minutes in length, and it was conducted online and really pushed it out to a list of about 6,000 business leaders, and that's the combined list of all those organizations, from the 2 chambers to reInvent and the Roundtable and the Alliance, et cetera. So we made it possible for as many people to participate and send out reminders. And we've had tremendous success through these first two waves. Over 1,000 people have participated so far. So let's go to the next slide. Obviously, with any survey, when you ask the firmographic questions or the demographic questions, it allows you to cross-tabulate and to look at different subsegments. I'm not going to do too much of that this morning, but just wanted you to know in the full report of the benchmark study, which is on 757recovery.com, you can see a lot of the subsegment analysis. Next slide. So what I want to do is just share the highlights with you today. So this is like an executive summary of what is in wave 2, what we've just learned. And you guys are in fact the first audience to see this. And the full report is going to be posted up tomorrow on 757recovery.com. Let's go to the next slide. So I have some great news for you. You see all the bad news on TV and the headlines in the paper, but a major finding, and one that we're tracking over time, is how disruptive this crisis has been to business. And you see that number 65%. That's the top 2-box number on a 1 to 5 scale. That's the people answering 4 or 5 in terms of how disruptive COVID-19 has been to their business. And that 65% number is high, but the first benchmark wave, that was at 75%. So to see it start to come down is almost like the peak in terms of the number of infections that people have across the country and world. So watching it drop from 75 to 65 is, I think, a good indicator that maybe we've been through the worst of this from a business standpoint. But it's going to take time to recover. 38%, that's a high percentage when you think about it, feel that their businesses are going to be affected for 1 year or more. So this is going to take some time to get through it. Next slide. So in terms of impact, and we're measuring this with each wave, 76% of the businesses out there have reported a loss of revenue. 36%, 1 in 3, have reduced workforce, and about a quarter have reduced their hours of operation. On the right-hand side, you see that 10% have closed completely, and that's a number that's consistent in some of the survey work we're doing in other markets. 1 in 10 businesses have just shut. So this is having a profound impact. Next slide. So in terms of that revenue breakdown, we asked a question to try to get a handle on just how much revenue you've lost. 45% of that 76% have lost up to 1/4 of their revenue. And you can see there's other numbers. So definitely taking a hit in terms of revenue. Next slide. And then in terms of that workforce breakdown, 33% reporting a decrease in workforce. And you can see how those numbers go across those ranges, 33% up to a 10% reduction, all the way to 16% of it over 76% reduction. What's interesting is that some people have actually done well in the middle of this crisis. 3% have reported an overall increase in revenue. And you see how that ranges across those different levels. Next slide. Top concerns. This is kind of what's keeping you up at night question. And right at the very beginning in the benchmark wave, employee health and safety was the #1 concern. Now, as things have settled down a little bit, long-term economic impact is on the top of minds of the business leaders across the 757. And then projecting the future with any degree of certainty. And I think this is something that we're studying and talking about a whole lot at SIR. We're shifting from the idea of just doing a plan for recovery or a plan for our business to a permanent state of planning, because you have to constantly evolve and constantly think about all the variables and not get locked into one blueprint, but to have a process that actually keeps you informed so you can be making the right decisions at the right time. So adaptability and being nimble, I think, are going to be important kind of new characteristics of winning businesses of tomorrow. Next slide. So just to that point, we have to start thinking about a flexible and nimble business model. So 4 in 10 have said that this COVID crisis has caused them to change their current business model. And if you look at the industries that have been affected the most, or the ones that have said they've changed their model the most, that it leads with finance and insurance and government, food services, accommodations, the hotel, hospitality industry, and then education and educational services. Think about the shift to distance learning. Just amazing. So overall, 4 in 10, but some industries more than others have had to shift to a different business model. Next slide. The CARES Act was a topic area that came out of the benchmark survey. Business leaders wanted to know more and more about the CARES Act and how the fellow leaders were availing themselves to some of the CARE Act programs. And so we got to a number of questions in the survey phase 2 or wave 2 to understand the CARES Act. And 62% reported that they had already applied for the CARES Act. And this survey was in the field really 1 week ago. And 89% of those were for the Paycheck Protection Program, or PPP or PPA loans. So that was by far the most popular of the sort of half a dozen or so CARES Act programs that you could avail yourself to. 60% said they had received their funds already. And again, this was just before the government decided to put a second round of funding into the payroll protection program. And then 52% were unsure if they were going to need more money in the future in terms of the Payroll Protection Act. Next slide. So overall, the CARES Act funding, 47% feel that the CARES Act is going to be helpful to their own business, and 54% they feel it's critical that more money gets put into the CARES Act in the future. And in fact, it did happen a couple of days later. So a lot of questions still remain that we saw in this survey, wave 2, questions about what is it going to be like for the forgiveness rules. And you know that it seems like a day doesn't go by that another interpretation is floated around about who qualifies for forgiveness or not. And so we're going to use the 757 forum to bring in experts to talk to those specific questions, which is really one of the beautiful things about this research. Is it really has a way for this whole coalition of business leaders and organizations to keep their finger on the pulse of really what's on the heart and minds of businesses across the 757, and to be able to take that information and use it immediately in informing the program of the 757recovery.com forum, which Doug will elaborate on a little bit more. Next slide. So this is where I'm going to hand it back over to Doug to tell you that this research that we've done now, 2 waves, has really been actionable research that have led to concrete decisions and immediate next steps. So back to you, Doug.
All right, John, thank you. Really well done, as always. So, right, so data's great, but you got to do something with it. And so what this group of business organizations have done is, first of all, get the first round out. So if you go to 757recovery.com, you'll see, anybody can see all the results. There's an executive summary, but all the detail we've given, the deep research to Jeff Tanner and his team over at Old Dominion University to sort of slice and dice. And we have shared it with, I think I mentioned this in the beginning, with our federal delegation and our state leaders, from Stephen Murray to Barry Duvall to Aubrey Lane and Brian Ball, just so they've got the same data that we've got. I mentioned earlier that clearly people are looking for information, and one of our first calls, we realized that Brian Stevens and his team at the Chamber were doing a fantastic job with this resource guide on their site. And so we've really driven folks to Brian and to Bob at the Virginia Peninsula Chamber as the repository of information. We don't all need to have our own repository. Let's build on what's already been put in place. And then, as I mentioned, we've had a series of these calls that have allowed our federal delegation to hear directly from folks in in the marketplace to our business leaders. Next slide, please. And then this forum has really become an interesting tool. I go back to what I said in the very beginning, this idea of becoming a connected business community, of the most connected business community. And what we heard, and folks are doing great stuff. Organizations are doing webinars, they're doing these Zoom calls, and they are terrific. But oftentimes you've got to show up at a specific time to get information that may or may not be a convenient spot for you. And you may not be getting the specific answer to the question that you have. And so we've developed this forum, and John's team was a huge help for us. But the idea is that you can go in and get information, get directed to information, particularly the survey. But the forum has become really an interesting tool. And we bring relevant experts, first based on the survey data, but then just what was hot at the time. And I'll touch on some of them in a minute. And we identify them on Monday. On Wednesday, we launch a 400-word blog about whatever their topic is. And then on Friday, Brian Stevens or I or someone else is interviewing folks and asking very specific questions. And then you have the opportunity to come in and ask and get your question answered. And frankly, I would tell you, you have the opportunity to go out there and post information. So this thing really, we hope, becomes a very organic forum that allows people to get and give information. Talked about packaging our legislative concerns, and we literally created a Word document out of the verbatim data from the survey and sent it off to the federal delegation so they could just literally turn and send it to their staff or whomever they wanted to send it to. Next slide. So then where do we go now? And so now really the conversation is about reopening, right? And what does reopening look like, and who's that going to happen for? And I will tell you, we have struggled, or I have struggled, and I think the group has struggled a little bit about exactly what is our swim lane. And we had some pretty conscious conversation about the fact that we're business and representing business's interests, but we're not really about the health and the opening protocols. And yet, it doesn't feel like that sort of information is getting developed in detail. And so we've had a lot of conversation with Barry Duvall, whom I think was on y'all's program last week, and they've launched a Blueprint for Getting Virginians Back to Work. As part of that, they're doing a very industry-specific survey around best practices for reopening. And so rather than trying to recreate that, we're going to tuck right up under that and share that information. And we're having a lot of conversation with Barry and his folks. We will do a third wave of the survey. I think this survey will really be about reopening and probably some open-ended questions, but also trying to gather information for what people are doing when we do reopen. Next slide, please. And then here's a place I think you can plug in. And I saw a question pop up from Kurt Krause, and this may start to answer it, Kurt. We're looking around at other states and other regions that are coming up with very specific plans on not only reopening, but really on recovering. How is it that you're going to get back to those pre-COVID-19 job numbers? You know, we had just gotten back to pre-recession job numbers. And so how do we get back there? And these folks at the bottom here have framed up this action plan that really starts to answer that question. And we are right now, it's a draft document, but it has got 10 committees. Kurt, one of them is a travel, tourism, and hospitality committee. And we want to have smart people that are engaged in those industries that will have initially, they'll pick their committee. They'll have 4 meetings. We're going to have very specific questions we're going to ask them to answer, and then we'll publish, you know, their recommendations on getting the economy back rolling again. We also see this as a process that stays in place for 6, 12, 18 months. We really launched this thinking we'd have 757 recovery up for a few weeks and then we'd all be back and rolling, and clearly that's not going to happen. And so clearly this is a long haul, and we think this tool, and part of why I want you to go to 757recovery.com is this is where we're going to manage this process. And the beauty of this technology is it gives us places where the The committees can host conversations, can host documents from agendas to minutes to white papers. We're going to ask key leaders in the region to help us draft white papers on certain documents as thought pieces. So we looked, Charlottesville's done a really interesting program called Rebound, playing off of the UVA basketball. And we stole a little bit from them. We told them we were stealing it from them. We've looked at Utah's plan and Colorado's plan, and we're trying to take the best of different folks or different communities. But this is not a static document. This is going to be a framework and a process. And this is a place where you all as stakeholders and leaders are going to have an opportunity to plug in. These next couple slides will just show you real quickly. And Mesa, if you can show, in case you haven't been to the site, this is what the opening page looks like. You can see the link at the top about the survey, but you can see you got a chance to join a forum or explore the survey. We've had, frankly, we paid for 10,000 page views because we didn't think this thing would go very far, very fast. We've had 20,000 page views. We've had 250 people register, create a profile, and over 5,000 unique visitors. So clearly there's an appetite for this thing. Next slide. And you can just see, if you go out there, this just is we grabbed a couple of them, but you can see the kind of topics that are out there. This is when Billy Furr was asking questions about employment law and what happens if somebody in my organization contracts COVID, what do I need to do? And he answered those questions very specifically. We had Mary Miller from United Way on. Next slide, please. And this is just, again, you see, once you get on the site, you can read and see what folks are recommending. You can sign up. I would tell you that we call them lurkers. Most people are getting in here and watching and then that's fine. But we've also had a few people that have gotten in and gotten really active on asking and answering questions, which is really where we hope this thing lands, that it almost becomes this self-sustaining process and community as we go forward. Next slide. And then we talked a lot, obviously, about the survey and what came from that. And I can't emphasize enough the 7 organizations that you see there are really the ones driving this thing as a group. And then I'll show you the next slide is really what our goals are for recovery and resilience. And we'll spell action right the next time. But it's really about how do you get your economic and community resilience back, and how do you get this community going again? How do you move from unsafe to safe? How do you function where your employees and your customers can operate under a persistent threat? And that's the environment that we're going to be in for a while. But how do we accelerate that comeback so that it is region-wide and we restore our employment levels? Next slide. So again, I said this earlier, all the work is going to be posted and hosted. Some of it will be private. We're going to let the committee sort of work privately among themselves. Then we'll post the outcome, but this will be sort of the base camp of where we keep all this data. As we said earlier, chair for each committee and a very consistent charge. And then our organizations, the chambers and the alliance and the workforce groups, we will actually staff the different committees. And I think next slide may be the wrap up. So I would tell you just 2 things going forward, and then we'd love to take some questions. I don't think Jim Spoor is able to join us today, but Go Virginia has really, Jim's organization staffs the regional council, and they reallocated some money week before last towards this economic recovery, and each region got $1 million. In the state, they reprogrammed $14 million. This is where this collaboration I'm talking about among these groups really starts to pay off. Jim called us up, said, listen, I'm hearing Go Virginia is going to have some money. We need to be at the front of the line when they do. So we got our act, we got our act together, and we submitted last week, and it's being considered today, a $530,000 grant application to stand up an offshore wind supply chain development hub. And we think that that offshore wind, Dominion is going to make some announcements here shortly, that is going to continue to move forward. And we think that's an opportunity to get jobs back online quickly and establish a real stronghold for that industry, playing off of the maritime industrial base that is already here. Interestingly, we submitted that application a couple of Fridays ago. The following Tuesday, I was on a call with my peers around the state where the program was being explained, and many were hearing it for the first time. And so we got an application in that'll be considered by the state on the 23rd of June and hopefully be in place July 1st. And if you didn't make those deadlines, you're on the sidelines until September. So a big thank you to Jim and Donna Morris and their team. And then we will also put in a $100,000 grant to fund this 757 Recovery and Resilience Action Plan. And we will use staff time from Old Dominion and the chambers and us and others as the match for that money. But we really got to get that program not only launched, but it's got to be robust for a period of time. So I'll close where I started, which is the idea that this region doesn't collaborate is an old reality, and we are collaborating well. I think Brian and Jeff Tanner and Bob McKenna may actually even be on the call now, and if others are, that's great. And if we get a tough question, we'll refer it to one of them. So Sarah Jane, I'll stop there and would love to take questions.
Yeah, thank you so much. So if you all are able to, if you have questions, you can go to the very bottom of your screen. There is a Q&A button there, so you can type some of your questions. Really appreciate both of you joining us today. That was an incredible amount of information, and we're, you know, it's obviously certainly going to be a road to recovery, but these are excellent steps to actually pave that way. I think one thought that as you were talking, is that obviously for a number of years, Hampton Roads has been very focused on several industry clusters. Do you think, you know, based on your opinions, do you think that the COVID-19 will change the trajectory for our region and that work?
It's an interesting question. I don't think it changes the industries. We actually just engaged a site selection consultant named Dennis Donovan. It was the consultant for ADP. And we've put Jeff Tanner helped us put in with some of their staff to start to have the conversation of what does office space look like? What are office needs? And as folks have started to figure out that not everybody needs to be in the office, they don't necessarily need to be in the headquarters. Are there satellite office opportunities for Hampton Roads to say, hey, here's a wonderful place to live, an inexpensive place to operate relative to perhaps where your headquarters is. Can we get some IT and finance and those sorts of, again, satellite offices? So I think the industry, the targets may stay the same, but I think how we go after them will change. I think clearly distribution and logistics is going to do well. And so that's one of our target industries, and we'll push on that. And the reality is we don't have a lot of product. There's not if you went to the ODU study a few weeks ago or rollout, it's not a lot of industrial products. So one of our challenges is going to be, frankly, creating some product.
That's yeah, I can certainly, I appreciate your you know, obviously your candid remarks there. So thank you. One question that I think Kurt was asking about was, he was very interested in finding out where the visitor economy fits into all of this. And of course, the tourism industry, along with other industries too, has certainly been hit hard, and the opening of that is going to look very different to some of our other businesses that are here in Hampton Roads. Do you have any thoughts on that, on the you know, on tourism and the hospitality industry and where that fits? Because of course it is a major economic driver in our region.
Yeah, and I think if you peel back some of the numbers that John showed you, you know, the 16% or whatever it was, or 10% that have closed. Now I'm going to tell you, my guess is it's in that industry. I think we're fortunate that Bruce Thompson was on the task force that the governor put forth, and so and based on the article this weekend, I don't have any inside information. I think that there's going to be some interesting recommendations coming out about how to function and how to operate. And in talking to Kurt, I think that he and his peers are assuming a very aggressive approach for the fall and some neat opportunities. So they're getting ready. I know John's got somebody in his organization that's actually on the tourism committee. So John, you may want to comment.
Well, I think you're exactly right. The hospitality industry is really one of the hardest hit in all of this. And I think because travel and tourism is one of Virginia's top industries, they have jumped right on a statewide task force planning effort. And a lot of people are on that committee and putting together plans that'll work across the state. So I think some good things will come out of this crisis down the road.
So thank you, gentlemen. I think we're seeing some more questions come in. So if it's okay, I'll go ahead and move to Chuck Marks, who's actually one of our civic board members, has asked, from your perspective, what have been the biggest obstacles to discerning the need of the community as all sectors collectively are scrambling to the new normal of continuous planning? Who wants to take that one?
Yeah, I think it was that first, it was those early days of really, you can't see anybody, you can't be around anybody the way we're used to, and so we all had sort of stories. But I think as we've started to use some of these tools, as Brian and Bob in particular have gotten, I think, more access to their members, and folks like Jim Carroll are really engaged. I think our information is better. And Brian or Bob may have a comment on that. So I think it was using these tools, getting folks to show up on these sites. Now, with all that said, you still don't know what you don't know. We're pretty plugged into the regional economic development group. So when I'm watching the local economic development offices are just mired in small business stuff, right? They just have to be. So they are really engaged in the small business side of trying to help folks get back up to speed.
Yeah, thank you. So Giovanna Janard had asked, Giovanna is actually in our current class and she's with Old Dominion University. She had talked about the importance of including higher educational institutions it would be important to include them in receiving recovery money from the CARE Act in addition to businesses as a key to economic development for our region. I think it's more of a statement more than versus a question, but she's exactly right. I mean, the higher ed component of this has changed. They have turned on a dime. We just did our programming last week actually and had several people from the education field talking to our class of 2020, and it's amazing what they have done, but certainly this has a major impact on them as they move forward into the fall and fall classes. Another question is from Karen Priest, and she wanted to share with you that she loves the 757recovery.com site to push out communications about the rebound. She's suggested maybe using a similar tool in the future to push out communication on the regional initiatives to kind of change that perspective on regional collaboration, maybe morphing that into something that has a positive spin on this at the very end of it. And she, certainly said that this presentation has been very helpful, and she says thank you.
Well, and that is the plan. And in many ways, this crisis sort of accelerated our need to make the business community better connected and more connected. So it is absolutely our intent to continue using that tool and others.
So Jason Scheckschneider, he's actually in our civic class as well for 2020. One of the questions he had, he's in the military, and he said, due to the large military presence in the greater 757, how do you see military organizations or policies contributing or impacting our regional recovery? Doug, would you be okay to answer that?
Yeah, I don't have the quick answer. We're watching closely in terms of how you access the base, who can go on. I don't know if I mentioned this, besides the sponsors we've had on, Craig Quigley from Harumpha and William Harrell from HRT are on most of our calls, and Bob Crum and Bill Crow and Kevin Page chime in when they can. And so we're staying plugged in through Craig. And so we'll continue to think through. One of our committees, that we think is a military committee to sort of answer exactly that question of sort of how are their models going to change? How's their access to the base going to change? Those sorts of things. And how do we figure all that in? But I don't know the answer yet.
Mm-hmm. One of the unique things that we've found in the survey is the tremendous support for the military. That, you know, Hampton Roads is military proud across all the forces, and the number one industry that the business leaders said we have to stand up is obviously healthcare and get that going full speed, but the military is right behind it. And I think that's way ahead of just business in general. So I think that's really a tribute to how much support there is for the military.
Thank you. Chris Stone has asked, would you comment on the bill that was introduced by Jason Myers, which was created the Hampton Roads Regional Arena Authority? You know that Norfolk's just purchased a Military Circle Mall, but do you see an arena being viable given the public's aversion to large public gatherings? What discussions are taking place for tourism, which of course we kind of touched on a little bit earlier on, and the future of large public gatherings?
Yeah. So my take, two comments is, having been fairly involved in a couple of these arena thoughts, it takes a lot of public money. It just does. And in the near term, I don't think you're going to have that public money to support an arena. Old Dominion put out a report that was in the paper that the region's local governments are losing $25 million a month in revenue, right? So you're seeing them really have to cut their capital improvement plans. And we like to gather. We love music. And so I think there will come a time when that'll come back. But I'd be surprised if you saw much focus on that in the next, call it 12 months.
Yeah.
Not to be wrong.
Well, thank you. Craig Cope has asked, based on Governor Northam's announcement yesterday, can you provide clarity about when non-essential businesses may be able to reopen?
Mm-hmm.
I'm hopeful. I was a little bit disappointed in the level of detail from yesterday. I think maybe unfairly, I was expecting a little more detail, but he did say that there is going to be more detail, more industry-specific detail coming. And I think in some way you have to applaud sort of the prudent look of, we're going to make sure that we hit certain numbers, and we're going to open in a very prudent manner. And I know we're all anxious to get everything back going. But I don't have a whole lot more detail actually, I don't have any more detail than what you heard yesterday. I would watch the state chamber. I think the state chamber is a really strong organization now, and I think they're going to try and help us get open safely, and see where it goes.
Yeah.
I don't know if you, or Brian, did Brian Stevens come on?
He did.
All right, so I
On the
don't want to leave him out of all this stuff. He and Bob McKenna may have thoughts.
Yeah, I guess I could share that I was a little disappointed with his announcement yesterday. And probably one of my biggest disappointments was, and I shared this with Doug yesterday, is that he's not looking at things from a regional perspective. I mean, I think that the business environment here in Hampton Roads, out in Southwest Virginia, is much different than up in Northern Virginia. And to lump the entire Commonwealth together as he starts putting together a reopening plan, I think is unfair. He made the comment that he doesn't want it to be a case of the have and have-nots. I would argue against that. It has nothing to do with have and have-nots. It has to do with one's business environment and the safety precautions in each region and those type of things. So we're urging the governor through letters and through back-channeling messages to reconsider that, and let each region advise him on when it is safe and what procedures we should take. I mean, as far as I know, we're the only region in the Commonwealth that has beaches, for instance. So why would you put beaches in the same category as something in Northern Virginia, for instance? That was my disappointment. I think we need to put the safety of our citizens first, but at the same time, we need to get businesses open, and we need to especially address our hospitality and tourism industry.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. Bob McKenna, I know that you have the ability to chat as well. Do you have any thoughts or any additional thoughts that you wanted to share with us today?
Well, all I can say is very well said, Brian. And we've been having this conversation during our meetings that Doug referred to earlier, where we meet every other day. And I share the sentiment that I was disappointed in yesterday's press conference, because one of the main things, as you see in the data that we've collected from the surveys, is that one of the top concerns is uncertainty about the future. So we need more information. We need, and to say that we're going to be unified as a state, vice allow regions to reopen at a different time schedule is, hey, I know it's difficult to be a leader and to make decisions in this process, but they need to take on regional input so we can actually get the whole state moving. Whether we do it all at the same time or we do it regionally, we got to get the whole state moving. So yes, we're all in this together, but we do have unique aspects of the economy down here that we have to focus on.
Yeah, absolutely. Just a total shift on this, well, say total shift, a little shift on this. Michael Daniels had actually just commented on, when we reopen businesses, this is another thing to consider, is there are families that are also, they have children at home. And if the schools don't open up, what is the impact on businesses there with regards to their employees returning back to work? And then the other thought on that is, the impact on the students as well, with them being out for such a long period of time before they go back. What will that look like and how will that impact the students? So those are two really valid points about how we move into the businesses opening and families being unable to get the childcare that they need in order to be able to do that.
Sarah, you may have seen that there was an announcement within the last couple of days of a task force around childcare, and Deborah DeCroce from the Community Foundation is one of the co-chairs. I think Gil Bland is on there. There's a handful of folks from down here, but we had our board meeting last week, and that issue came front and center, that if we don't figure out how to help people take care of their kids while they're at work, they can't come back to work. So I'm hopeful something interesting and good comes out of that task force.
And Sarah Bishop, along that line, she's very engaged in public K through 12 education. She's asking about the focus on the improvement on public K through 12 education in our region. She states, obviously without it, it will remain hard to sell the region to individuals and to the industry sectors. So that's, obviously, as we move forward and out of this, the focus, I'm quite certain, will move back to how we make sure that we are up to par so that we are enticing new businesses into the area with the great education that we have here. And John Klein, very last question of the day today. He was asking about as we move into economic recovery and coordinate with state committees on steps to ensure employee and customer safety, what are the current perspectives on regulatory requirements versus best practice recommendations? Is this being leveraged as an opportunity to establish business in the state, or the 757 as leading the charge on COVID economic recovery? Sorry.
So I'm not sure this gets exactly what he's asking, but part of what I hope we're able to do when this is over is say that as a region we responded appropriately and we flattened the curve, and as a region we reopened responsibly and kept it flat and got our economy back going in a quick and timely manner. And not all regions are going to do that. And it's not a guarantee that we're going to do that. But I think if we can, that then sends a strong message to folks that want to come in from out of market and invest. It says that's a resilient region that has strong leadership and handled a difficult situation well. And so part of our challenge will be not only doing that, but telling that story of how we did it. So
yeah. Absolutely. As we wrap this, Giovanna brought up a very good point, which is how can, as regional leaders that are sitting on this call today, how can they support the recovery of 757? Are there any steps that are immediate, and how can they become engaged going through, as this is obviously going to be a long-term recovery process?
Yeah, so for me, I think that forum, 757recovery.com, is a great avenue. I talked, for example, Dr. Agarwal from Old Dominion called me over the weekend and said, listen, I've done all kinds of research on the hospitality industry. I think I could come. So he's going to write a paper for us. We're going to post it. And he and I are going to get on there and have a conversation about how this has impacted them. So for Giovanna, I think and we've got actually Old Dominion's going to have somebody talking about supply chain on Friday. So I think as your organizations have expertise, and that expertise can be shared with the region. And so I challenge you to do that. Help us do that. I think it is an opportunity to plug into some of this process of recovery is going to take everyone. And so get engaged. And then the last thing is, if we have fractured efforts. In other words, if there's 17 localities doing 17 things, or there are 6 different business groups doing different things, I think that will be confusing and ineffective. And it's part of why pulling these organizations together, these 7 organizations together, and trying to do that in a unified way, I think is really helpful. And so I would just challenge Civic or Greater Norfolk or Virginia Beach Vision or anybody, tuck up under this initiative, run with us. And I think that'll make us more effective as a region.
Yeah, absolutely. We're excited and we're ready. Our alumni have been asking, so we're certainly ready to step in and help where needed. Thank you so much, Doug and John, for your time today. This has been a really incredibly informative session, and we're really grateful for your leadership in the community as well. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
We're so appreciative to the many organizations that are part of the 757 Business Recovery Forum, and can't thank Brian and Bob enough for just dropping on and chatting. Sorry, British term. Please take time to visit 757recovery.com, join the forum, be part of that conversation and share your best practices. As they said earlier on, your voice needs to be heard, and you certainly can help other businesses that are out there. You can also view the survey results there too. Please save the date for our next session on Thursday, May the 14th. We'll be joined by our nonprofit partners and healthcare sector leaders in the morning. And then the afternoon session, the Civic Class of 2020 will reveal their findings for their community impact initiatives. Megan's actually going to send you across a link in the chat function on where this is located on our website so that you can sign up and get more details. Thank you all for joining us on this webinar. Please consider giving back in any way that you can. Here at Civic, we hope that you'll continue to join us for future programming, and we appreciate the work that our alumni, class participants, and community leaders are doing in the region. If you'd like more information on ways you can support our mission, please visit our website, civichr.org, and visit our support page. Megan has just shared that link in the chat too. It's my hope that we can come together today to create a wave of generosity and citizen engagement. We have the power to heal and the power to unite. After all, we are the 757. Stay safe, stay well, and again, thank you for joining us today.